In this second flight, I want to introduce you to a grape variety called Cabernet Franc. And its birthplace is here in the Loire Valley. And so I wanted to do something exceptionally fun for me, and I think very interesting for everyone else. I wanted to pair two Cab Francs next to one another so we could get a sense of the variety and also of the terroir going on in the region, and also how incredibly wonderful these wines can be. Now, that being said, I think Cabernet Franc from the Loire, is actually quite a challenge for a lot of tasters, a lot of wine drinkers. And I would have to say that down here at my Milwaukee store, we do actually sell quite a bit of it, but say not nearly as much as its progeny, Cabernet Sauvignon from Bordeaux or from the United States. Now, I think that begs a question, which is why we sell much, much less of it. And I actually think it's an easy answer, and it's the reason I chose this wine for you, which is Chanteloup-Cery, and it's from the village of Bourguis. The Chanteloup-Cery, to my understanding, is the place where the larks sing. So if that makes it easy, think of little birds singing, and hence the lark on the label. Bourguis is the region that it's from. So I'm going to just put that into our map here, and we're right in the center of the Loire, Bourguis. Now, Bourguis has a neighbor up here, St. Nicholas de Bourguis, and then it has another neighbor down here, Chinon. And we're going to try Chinon in the next wine. So our two partners here are Bourguis and Chinon. But let's go back to that first thought of why do I think it's a little bit of a challenge? And I think if you've got the glass in front of you, you can probably sense it just on the smell alone. To a lot of people, when they first smell this, I think they're kind of flummoxed about what to make of it. I was once tasting with a restaurateur sommelier who I really enjoyed his company a lot, and he said, it's the perfect sense of Cabernet Franc because it smells like underripe blueberry. Now, I don't know a lot of us who go around eating underripe blueberries, but I hadn't thought of that experience as pleasurable before, and I still don't. But on the other hand, I've grown to love this smell. The other thing that I think a lot of people smell when they smell this wine is it smells kind of leafy, sort of like green leafiness to it. Now, if we think about our Bordeaux's, or we think to Napa Cabs, which I'm sure many of us have, green, leafy, and underripe would not describe a wine that would be typically popular, and probably not describe a wine that would sell a lot for me here at the store. On the other hand, this was my breakthrough wine for Cabernet Franc, and it's one that I dearly love. I was once doing a session for club managers of Southeast Wisconsin. I was presenting to about 60 club managers, and they really wanted to know more about French wine. And the reason is they wanted to diversify their wine lists, get out of the normal range that their club members were drinking, Cab, Chard, Sauvignon Blanc, and show off something else. The idea wasn't to offend club members, of course, but the idea was that clubs needed to up their game a little bit. I showed them this wine, and they all had about that same reaction of, really, what the hell are we going to do with this? And I said, here's what you do with this wine. Think of this. You've got a couple, maybe two couples out. They're golfing. It's midday. They're out on the 9th green. They're having a good time. And it's a gorgeous day, maybe slightly cool. You as a club manager, you chill this bottle of red. So you make it colder. You make it noticeably colder, not freezing, but you make it below, room temperature. And then you bring it out to them with maybe just a cheese from the region, just a little bit of Chev, if you will. And you give them a glass of this, and you give them a little bit of Chev, and you've suddenly got an extraordinary experience on your hands. Just a magical, magical experience. The other way to emphasize this is people who travel the Loire and taste and go up and down the river on a tour, Americans who go on a tour, and they come back and they'll say, we had this great wine. And the funny thing is we had 2 bottles of it at lunch, and we weren't drunk and we never got hungover at all. What is it? Do you have it? It was amazing. And I say, yes, it's Loire Cabernet Franc. And the reason for all of that is it's light, it's refreshing, it's the perfect partner for emphasizing another experience like friendship, beautiful day golfing, beautiful simple cheese, without necessarily calling attention to itself, but yet also just that mellow high of a gorgeous little amount of alcohol to it. That was my introduction to this wine and to Cabernet Franc, and it totally changed my opinion about Cabernet Franc. Now, instead of sensing underripe blueberry and leaf to it, I sense just the pure wonderfulness of Bourguignon, the place that it comes from, and just the joy that it feels when you have it on your palate and in the glass. It's a laughing wine. It makes people want to laugh, and it feels like it's just bubbling over itself. So I've always appreciated this wine for breaking through for me on that. Now with that, let me take a drink first because I do indeed enjoy it. With that, I don't want to imply that this wine and Cabernet Franc can't be serious and can't be something that's special or for a special occasion. And that's why I wanted to pair these two together. And when we pair them together, I don't want to suggest that Chanteloup is making a less serious wine or something that can't be engaged in as thoroughly. I just want to contrast what these two wines are about to give you two different sides of what Cabernet Franc from the Loire can be. Now, if you notice in our map, Bourguignon and Chinon, of course, our map is entirely drawn to scale, but you can notice they're about the halfway point. And one of the things that starts to change the halfway point if we were starting in Nantes going to Sancerre is that we're having the gradual shift of climate here. We're going from the Atlantic maritime influenced climate over heading into a continental climate. And we'll see as the years go on how things shape out, but generally what it means is as we pull this way, we're going to get cooler winters but warmer summers. And in Chinon, this can and Bourguignon, dramatically affect the wines of how warm those summers are. Because if the summers get fairly warm, the wines are going to get riper. They're going to get bigger and more powerful. Instead of having the pretty aromas that we sense here, they're going to gain structure and density, and they're going to get darker fruit characters. It's fascinating to see because here is kind of a break point, and we'll see it in some white wines too later, a break point of where climate starts to affect things. The other thing we've got is in Bourguignon versus Chinon, we have two different soil types going on here. Bourguignon as a soil type tends to have more sand to it. It's not all exclusively sand, but it tends to have more sand. Chinon actually tends to have clay limestone. More about that in a second. With sand and Cabernet Franc, you tend to get wines that are lighter on the palate, more perfumed, and not as dense. And indeed, I think this is a perfect example of that in Cabernet Franc. Lighter, more perfumed, and not as dense. Okay, so that's our Chanteloup and our beautiful Bourguignon. I would again point out to you, I think that wine, and I was reading the Hugh Jancis Robinson map of Chinon and Bourguignon to refresh my memory about them, and one of the direct quotes that they used was, the wines are exceptionally undervalued for what's in the glass and the bottle, and I have to agree. Now, let's take a taste. And if you're a Wisconsinite, you'd be familiar with the idea of double fisting. So why don't we go ahead and double fist a little bit here and smell back and forth between our first and second wine, and then taste back and forth as well. That's beautiful too. Here, I wanted to juxtapose these two wines because the producers have different intentions in mind for them, and indeed they are different producers. With the Bourguignon that we just had, that family, the Chanteloup, really mean to just have it be a fun, fresh introduction to Cabernet Franc and Loire. They make more powerful wines. This one is just meant to be great drinking. Here, this is Domaine de Palus, with Domaine yes, excuse me, thought I was pouring the wrong thing. With Domaine de Palus, he does make fun, simple, easy drinking wines, but I wanted to choose his very top wine. Now, I had the chance to meet the winemaker here, and he is very much interested in an idea that's coming in the Loire, but I don't think has yet arrived, which is almost like our Burgundian pyramid that we experienced a little bit a while ago. Meaning that there would be regional wines, maybe across the Loire, but then there would be village wines, specific to a village like Chinon, and then there would be Premier Cru and Grand Cru wines, and those would be fitted with specific vineyards and specific sites. The idea, I think, for him is that Cabernet Franc can be as great as any Burgundy or any Bordeaux, and certain sites produce it better than others. Now, when he started making this, and I believe it was in the 2006 vintage, he was aiming at the best possible wine that he could make. And for that reason, he was using 3 different vineyard sites in Chinon. With this in the 14 vintage, if I got the interview with him right, we were we were going between my broken French and his broken English. If I got the interview right, this is the vintage where he shifted to one specific vineyard site because he thinks it makes the absolute top bottling of wine. So here, I really wanted to show you what I also think of as one of the absolute best of Chinon. So, Chinon is the village to the south and the region to the south of Bourgues. Both Bourgues and Chinon can make red and white wines, but it's 100% Cabernet Franc red wines that they're most famous for. Now in Chinon, the soil type changes from Bourgues and goes to a clay and limestone mixture. Now we've seen clay and limestone mixtures before, specifically in Burgundy in varying proportions. Very different than the sand that you see up in Bourgues. The interesting thing here is I think you can smell it and you can taste it on the palate. With the smell of the wine in a clay-sand mixture, it's almost like it becomes more Burgundian. More cherry fruit to it, less leafy aromas, and maybe just a little bit more concentrated in its fruit direction as well. To me, it also always has a violet tone to it that I love, and as the wine ages, that violet character keeps on coming up. Then when you have it on the palate, I think that really very strongly suggests the clay limestone mixture of the region. The wine is denser, and it's also much more concentrated. Now, when I say those two things, it's not like it comes across as a Bordeaux. It is denser in the sense that it's got more of the fruit character, but also kind of more of the drive and energy that makes the Bourgues so fun and so fresh. So it's an odd one to describe because it's not like it's a bigger wine per se, because the fruit, savory, and tannin and acid are all in harmony. It's just that there's simply more of it. Now here, with this recording, we are drinking the 2014 vintage, and he actually purposely releases very late. So this is already 6 years in the bottle, and he really wants that to kind of be the formation of where this wine goes forward. What I can tell you is that with these wines and how they taste and how they feel on the palate, they are actually exceptionally long-term aging wines. Kermit Lynch is the importer of Chanteloup-Souris, and he's noted that the 1976 vintage, the first vintage he started working with the family, is still drinking great. With Domaine Palus, the Grand Van was in 2006, and the renditions, the bottles of that wine that I've had are absolutely fantastic still. Now what happens, and it's a glorious journey to behold, is that the kind of tang and tautness of these wines as they age eases up on the palate, and you get more of its fresh raspberry fruit character coming up. And that, I would say, is about in its late youth stage. Then as it enters its mid-stage, the leafy aromas become way more violet and also with hints of earthiness. The palate becomes broader and it eases into itself. I say all of this to you because here are a couple of wines that if you are thinking about experimenting with aging wines, you get an opportunity to have some of the world's best, but again, at great prices. They're wines that you can actually lay down a case of and try them once a year and see where they go and how they're going to go. I think they're beautiful wines for that reason. You can drink them now, or you can drink them as late as you want to. Okay, Loire Red, an important variety, Cabernet Franc. I encourage you to explore it as much as you can. You can go and buy a map or just look online, and you'll notice that going both east and west, you're going to have all kinds of other regions in the Loire that I didn't mention, and they may make Cabernet Franc, but they'll make other varieties too, and I encourage you to try them all. I've got one more red for you in this course, just to kind of explore a little bit. We'll get to it in the next flight. All right, here for this flight, a big finish for us, if you will. I'm going to take you back to Sancerre Pouilly-Fumé. We had it in the first flight with Pinot Noir, and really that was about Pinot Noir. But here I wanted to show you what Sancerre and Pouilly-Fumé are famous for, and that is Sauvignon Blanc. So if it's a white, it's going to be 100% Sauvignon Blanc from Pouilly-Fumé and Sancerre, and most people regard these two. When I first started in wine 15 years ago, Pouilly-Fumé was the one that was considered the top. Nowadays, most people, I think, consider Sancerre the top. It would be a bold taster to me who can distinguish between the two, so I'll encourage you to explore both. Commercially, we sell more Sancerre, so I'm highlighting it here for you. Now, Sancerre is the total switch of both terroir in terms of climate and also in terms of soil. Here you are all the way in, and you are in a continental climate. So again, one that's going to be cool in the winter and can become very warm in the summer. It is also, again, on the Kimmeridgian soil plate, different than the rest of the Loire. The Kimmeridgian soil plate is also part of Chablis, Champagne, and now the commercial growing regions that make sparkling wine in England. What do all of those wines have in common? Their incredible vivacity, their incredible high acidities. And I think that partnership with the soil means that these wines are some of the greatest that you're going to experience in the world. Now with Sancerre, there are actually 14 different villages that can take the name of Sancerre for their wines. It's not a big region, but there's a lot of different villages that can take the name. Also, to my understanding, Sancerre purposely opted out of doing a Premier Cru, Grand Cru kind of spectrum like Burgundy. I don't know if it was for tax reasons, meaning they didn't want to pay the government more if they were producing Grand Cru wines, or if it was just producers didn't want to be bothered with more regulation. So one of the interesting things is, even though there are 14 different villages and all kinds of interesting different sites, you kind of have to piece it together on your own of which ones are going to be right or the top or the best for you. The other thing that happens in Sancerre is with the Kimmeridgian soil plate that you have intermixing of different soils on top of that. One of the most famous is Silex, and a man named Dieter Dagenau made Silex soils famous for his Pouilly-Fumés. The other one is over in Sancerre, you get Chavignon as the main village, and then its three main vineyards, Le Mont d'Homme, I should have them up there, but I'll stick with Le Mont d'Homme because I can't name them. And that is, on top of it, a mixture of limestone and clay again. So different soil types. Here, let's take a taste of this wine. And I think there's something just extraordinary going on here. And this is a beautiful wine, and I'm really happy to be able to show it to you. But first, what's in the glass? If you know Sauvignon Blanc, it's one of the more popular varieties in the United States, but that's because of New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. And I, of course, love New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, but New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc tends to be overtly fruity, meaning it tends to display a lot of passion fruit or grapefruit character on the nose, citrus, tropical fruits. In Sancerre, because of its soil type, you tend to get more savory notes, and the Silex soil tends to give you one note in particular, which is flint. Now, again, we as American connoisseurs may not really dive into flint-smelling wine, but I think here with Reverdy, you get a sense of that grapefruit citrus character, a little grapefruit pith to it, but also kind of tangerine in there as well. And then you get, I don't want to say flint here, but a sense of stoniness to it, meaning that these are wines that are really complex in their diverse array of flavors and aromas to them. Then on the palate, it's always interesting to me because, of course, it's Sauvignon Blanc and it's a very high acid variety, but it's not the absolute brisk, breathtaking high acid that you feel from, say, lemonade or New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. It's got this rich sense of texture to it that you can feel on the palate. Now, Sancerre and Pouilly-Fumé have had a different course than, say, Muscadet, our first wine. Whereas Muscadet overproduced about 20 years ago and lost a significant amount of its market and then vineyards, Sancerre has had the reverse. It's actually become more popular over the last 20 years, and it's gotten more expensive. It's also expanded as well. I think the reason for this is that the secret is out, if you will, about Sancerre. Both that these wines drink incredibly well right now, but for many people who love them, if you're drinking some of the top producers, they age for a significant number of years. I've had examples of Cotat, Boulay, and Reverdy that are almost 20 years old, and they are just exceptional wines. They're different than what you're tasting now in their youth, but they are really gorgeous. One of my clients actually went to the restaurant at the Eiffel Tower, which I forget, and they were featuring 20-year-old Sauvignon Blanc from Sancerre as the glass pour. And he said it was one of the most extraordinary wines that he had ever had in his life. Now, I'm sure they also paired it with something extraordinary as well because it's a 3-star Michelin restaurant. But again, what I point out to you here is a chance to have some of the greatest wines going on in the world, and yet at fairly reasonable prices. Now, we have two. We're tasting one. Well, we should probably open the other, but we're tasting one, but I wanted to point both of them out to you. Here, Reverdy, Hippolyte Reverdy, is a producer that we usually only get one case of a year. For some reason, in the year 2020, we ended up with much more of it. So we love it, and frankly, I don't usually get to drink it. Usually it just sells, and that's the end of it. We absolutely love it. And the reason is because of what I just described with the taste. It's multi-layer sensations of savory and fruit on the nose, and it's gorgeous texture on the palate. Hippolyte Reverdy, to my understanding, is just one guy. He's the 13th generation to make Sancerre under his family, so the 13th generation. And he's one man who goes out and does all the work himself, farming the vineyard, doing all the agriculture himself, making all of the wine himself. I, like I said, haven't met him, but I've certainly met other French vintners who really are kind of the land and want to be of the land. They don't travel. They want to make what their family made, and they want to pursue it to the best level possible. And I think certainly this is an example of that. Now, an interesting contrast and something to think about in Sancerre that I don't think we have an example of today is Reverdy uses very traditional winemaking techniques. The wines are fermented in stainless steel, but then transferred to old oak, let to do things naturally, and then bottled. Other producers, though, in Sancerre have been trying lots of different things. With the rise in Sancerre's popularity, they've been trying all kinds of things like letting the grapes get riper, meaning purposely letting the grapes accumulate more sugars, which would rise alcohol and make the wines much more fruit character and densely textured. Some producers have actually been trying to ferment in new oak and see what new oak does to Sancerre and how it changes Sancerre. Other producers, and I kind of wonder about this because I think you sense it in warm years, and I wonder about global warming changing it. Sancerre is on a bend in the river, and with the bends in the river, you can typically get the onset of botrytis. We talked about botrytis just a little bit in our Bordeaux chapter because it helps make the famous white wine of Sauternes and the dessert wine of Sauternes. Here in Sancerre, they're not aiming for botrytis in order to make dessert wines, and I can't prove that they're aiming for botrytis at all. But on occasion, I think that Sancerre gets an onset of botrytis that they then ferment dry, making the wines ever more concentrated and also adding some exotic saffron spice aromas to them. So certainly in some of the top bottles you see, I think all these things are going on or could be going on in the wines. To me, it makes it an incredibly interesting place to explore. Maybe some people would argue that it's changing the character of Sancerre, but I think it's all delicious to me. Now, because we only get a small allocation of Reverdy, I wanted to point out Brûlé to you. A fun thing here with Brûlé is if you have, and we'll put these both on the website, if you have them side by side, you're talking about two producers who are probably within 5 kilometers of one another. But Brûlé is based in the very famous vineyard of Chauvignon. And Brûlé actually has Chauvignon's 3, what would be Grand Crus, Mont Dame, and the other 2 that I can't get out of my brain right now. He has all 3 of those, and indeed, we sell all 3 of those top bottlings of his. This is the young vines from all 3 of those sites. So you're getting 2 different site pictures of Sancerre, and you're getting 2 different producers making them. Now, when I set this up, my high hopes were that this was a silex site, leading us to understand silex as a kind of flinty, more forceful taunt wine, and this was a clay limestone site, leading us to experience a more rounded, a little bit richer, plusher style of Sancerre. In fact, that's not the case. They're both clay and limestone. So the differences that you're tasting, yes, I think are related to village and site, but also to producers as well.